Hi everyone, we are Sofia Mancilla, Daniel Castaca, Celeste Rogers, Alana Pisato, and Paula Crisimana. And today we're going to talk about reading. According to Smith and Rogers, interest in second language reading research and practice has dramatically increased in the past 2 decades. Much of this interest is due to increasing recognition that reading abilities are critical for academic learning, that L2 reading represents the primary way that L2 students can learn on their own beyond the classroom, and due to the increasing recognition that we all live in a multilingual and multicultural world, which is becoming more interconnected through the global media and the new global economy. In our presentation, we're going to outline some complexities, key issues concerning second language learning and processes, and some of the implications of these issues for instructional practice. Now, let's talk about reading purposes. Because we read for a variety of purposes, we often vary the cognitive processes and knowledge resources that we use. It is possible to talk about general labels such as scanning, skimming, reading for general understanding, reading to learn, reading to integrate information, and reading to evaluate critically. To understand better these purposes, we need to determine how the underlying cognitive processes and resources systematically relate to the ability to achieve them. We will assume that second language readers in academic setting most often need to develop reading to learn and reading for understanding. Under both purposes, it can be said that comprehension occurs when a reader extracts and integrates information from a text and combines it with previous knowledge. A definition of reading requires some recognition that a reader engages in 3 major levels of processing: linguistic processing at a phonological, morphological, syntactic, semantic, and discourse levels. At the second level, a reader engages in comprehension building level of processing, which involves text summary building, monitoring, among others. And at the third level, a reader draws upon a wide range of cognitive resources, and some cognitive abilities include working memory, long-term memory abilities, motivation, goal setting, and others. So teachers need to carefully think about the purposes of the tasks that are planned for the lessons and what that will imply for the learners. For instance, scanning tasks such as matching verbs with images can be used as warm-up activities to activate prior knowledge. There are further complexities for second language readers. They expose the variation in abilities that can be found for L1 readers, variation in training, age, schooling, socioeconomic level. They are usually acquiring a complex cognitive ability that is in some ways different from L1 reading. And also, second language reading should not be viewed as a merely slower version of doing the same tasks as in native language. So there are similarities as well as differences, and some of these differences are linguistic and processes differences, individual and experiential differences, sociocultural and institutional differences, and all of these differences need to be taken into account when we are planning the lessons.
Okay, so now I will talk about motivation. When comparing L1 and L2 reading context, we will find different individual motivations and different emotional responses. These may be based on academic goals, socialization practices, and prior educational studies. Motivation is crucial for our students' success in reading. So we've been thinking about some ways to motivate them. We can propose interesting articles to them, articles that are up to date, articles that they may find interesting. Also, it is important to give specific instructions prior a reading activity and to engage them to do some research on specific words or on specific vocabulary structures and so on. And it is important for the teacher to choose an appropriate text, a text that goes, that is suitable to their level, not a very complex and not a very simple text. It's important to mention as well the amount of exposure to print. L1 and L2 readers also differ in the amount of print exposure, of course, that they experience. L2 students will have simply less exposure to print, more limited vocabulary knowledge, fewer opportunities to develop knowledge of discourse structure, and this may cause less confidence when facing challenging texts. L1 readers spend years building up the amount of exposure to print needed to develop fluency and automaticity. It is also important to mention the social and cultural resource differences. Cultural and social differences are reflected in the way discourse and texts are organized. So some factors are the way the text expresses interpersonal relation with the reader, the expectation about the amount of new information that is embedded in the text, and also the assumption about how explicitly reader interpretation should be guided. In different languages and cultures, people often develop preferred ways of organizing information, and this is something we need to, as teachers and as students, may take into consideration as well. There are similarities between L1 and L2 reading, and as an L2 reader becomes fluent and highly skilled in reading comprehension, the process involved become more similar to that in L1 reading. So the impact of L1 and L2 differences will diminish with increasing L2 reading proficiency. And the reasons for increasing similarities may include the following: reading practice, of course, exposure to L2 print, something we've been talking about, greater resource knowledge in the L2 and the social cultural world of the L2, greater fluency and automaticity of L2 reading skills, and an increasing willingness to read in the L2 for various purposes. Now we would like to mention the processes involved in L2 reading comprehension. As we said, reading comprehension is quite complex, and it varies depending on tasks, motivations, goals, and language skills. We can find two reading processes: the lower level process and the higher level process. Celeste, we will talk about this in the next slide.
Okay, as Paula said, I will talk about lower level processing skills and higher level processing skills. When we talk about lower level processing skills, we should bear in mind that the term lower should not be interpreted as easier. It designates those processes that work automatically for skilled readers. Here we can find three main processes. The first one is word recognition, rapid and automatic word recognition. In the case of fluent L1 readers, this means recognizing almost all the words encountered, 99–100% of the words, and also distinguishing them in less than 1/10 of a second. At this stage, lexical accents in fluent readers is automatic, or in other words, definitions and interpretations cannot be suppressed. processing and automaticity typically requires hours of practice, and this fact should be emphasized by the teacher to help those students who get frustrated easily. A second stage we may find syntactic parsing. Here, the reader is able to take words and store them, creating a kind of bank of words, let's say. And when the reader needs them, they will be able to extract them for its use. This stage is key for helping support phrase level and clause level meaning. It disambiguates the meaning of words with multiple meanings and determines what definitive articles and pronouns are the most suitable for the text. And a third and the last process at this level is the semantic proposition formation. And this stage starts up almost at the same time as syntactic parsing, and it involves the process of combining word meanings and structural information into basic clause level meaning units. Here, the reader is given time to integrate all the information, connecting elements into phrases and clause level propositional units in a way that everything makes sense, let's say. This process is known as the word-to-text integration process. These processes are not easily controllable in any conscious way and occur relatively automatically for the fluent reader. If all the processes function well, they will work effortlessly, generating key parts of text meaning. On the contrary, if they do not function in combination, the reader might pause to consider consciously what he or she is reading, and the reading comprehension slows down, becoming hard to maintain. When we talk about higher level processing skills, we talk about perhaps to a more related idea to what we know as reading comprehension. As fluent readers, we are supposed to form summaries of what we read, more elaborated interpretations of different texts, and establish different purposes for reading by embarking inferences of several types, monitoring, comprehension, among others. These higher level processes define the reading to learn process. The most fundamental comprehension stage at this process can be called linkages and associations. The coordination of ideas from a text that represents the main points and draw on the reader's background knowledge, but now in a strongly conscious way. As the reader continues the processing, he or she will distinguish those ideas that do not play an important part in the text and will prune them. This pruning highlights the ability of inhibitory suppression, or in other words, the ability to remove unnecessary mental information efficiently. We have to distinguish that at the same time that this happens, this pruning, the reader begins to interpret the information influenced by his or her motivation, tasks, goals, attitude, and prior knowledge. The last step is the integration, in which the reader takes the relevant information to form its own interpretation. So, why is this information so important or useful for us? By knowing how our brain works and following the correct steps according to both processes, we can form the cognitive process resources necessary for reading, both in our mother tongue and in a foreign language, that would be retained in our long-term memory. Continuing with the importance of how our brain works, another theme I'm going to talk about is general cognitive processing and working memory. Working memory is known as the activated network of information and related processes that are being used at a given moment. For example, the words that are accesses, the information that is skewed grammatically, meanings and formation of text, Everything, all of that is active in the working memory. Here we can observe the skills already mentioned, the lower and the higher, both with their differences, of course. In the case of lower level processing skills, we have a very short activation span, just few seconds from 2 to 5 seconds. And in the case of higher level processes, they will have a continual reactivation of the main ideas. Due to this difference, we should bear in mind that processing of active information should be quickly. If it's quickly, the information will be retained, but if it's not, the information fades from the memory and must be reactivated. But despite this relevance, working memory processes as just one part of all these skills. If we combine the general cognitive abilities, all the linguistic skills, resources, and background knowledge, all of these in combination indicate that no one general cognitive ability determines a learner's level of reading ability. In the words of Perfetti and Adolf, reading comprehension is widely agreed to be not one, but many things. At a minimum, it entails cognitive processes that operate on many kinds of knowledge to achieve many different kinds of reading tasks. Learning is more certainly a combination of basic cognitive abilities and learned abilities through input, interaction, and effective practice. Of course, we should encounter some difficulties during this process, for example, when readers do not have adequate background information. In the case of L2 readers, they may choose perhaps a slow mechanical translation process, but in both situations, no matter if the tools used are not the appropriate ones, successful reading comprehension is not likely to occur. That's why students need to be exposed, an extended exposure. They need to engage in reading for many hours at text and task level appropriate to their abilities, and in that way, text can be processed efficiently and that students will be developed as fluent readers. Now, Daniel is going to continue with key issues in L2 reading.
Key issues in L2 reading. There are many topics that could be addressed about L2 reading research. In this section, the author focuses on 5 common topics that affect how reading is taught. The first one is word recognition. Word recognition is a process in which students learn to identify word and word parts. Fluent word recognition involves an interaction of activated orthographic, phonological, and semantic syntactic processes. Extensive research has demonstrated that training in phonological awareness and grapheme sound correspondences predicts later reading development among children and beginner readers. The automatization of these grapheme sound relations are the foundation of all readings. Especially beginner readers need to establish a strong association between the orthographic forms and the sounds. It is important for teachers to recognize students who have difficulties with grapheme sound correspondences in order to give them training in word recognition skills through vocabulary development, fluency practice, and extensive reading. The second one is vocabulary knowledge. Fluent readers have very large recognition vocabulary knowledge resources. It is fundamental component skills for reading comprehension. The concept called the lexical quality hypothesis claims that skilled reading rests on high quality word representation that includes orthographic, phonological, and semantic syntactic information. It means that the more words of high lexical quality the reader has, the more proficient that reader will be. And this concept of lexical quality hypothesis led us to a more basic question. How many words are we talking about? How many words does a reader need in order to carry out academic reader without significant instructional support? Well, the most widely accepted figure is that high school graduates know on average 4,000 words as fluent L1 readers, and about 8,000 to 9,000 words for reasonably fluent L2 readers. For some researchers, the only way to build a large number of high-quality lexical entries is through extensive amount of reading experience. For them, this is the only way to develop this advanced synthesis and critical thinking that is so necessary for advanced academic performance. As teachers, we can't help our students to develop a large recognition vocabulary because vocabulary is strongly related to L2 reading comprehension. Teachers can use different strategies, of course, for vocabulary development, depending on the age and proficiency of the student, from words, semantic maps, and to extensive reading, we can help our students to improve their vocabulary knowledge. Finally, the following one, the third one, is morphology, syntax, and discourse structure knowledge. Advanced level of proficiency also needs morphological, syntactical, and discourse knowledge. It impacts on reader comprehension. The morphological awareness has been found to be an important component for reading skills, for its direct contribution to reading comprehension and for its direct contribution supporting other critical component skills. Syntax is a powerful predictor for reading comprehension abilities. In L2, reading grammatical knowledge is one of the most powerful contributors to comprehension, to reading comprehension. And finally, the role of discourse structure knowledge on L1 reading comprehension is increasingly important because discourse structures are patterns of organization that are used to convey information in a coherent manner. And the major benefit for students are that these discourse structures can be explicitly taught by teachers. Another benefit is that these structures support students' reading comprehension as well.
According to the linguistic interdependence hypothesis, L1 reading skills can be transferred to L2 reading. That means that if we are capable of applying reading strategies in L1, well, we will also be able to apply them in L2. This has been debated by the language threshold hypothesis. It states that L1 reading skills will be useful only when L2 reading skills are developed. That means that we need some proficiency in L2 before applying L1 reading skills. The language threshold hypothesis tries to state where that the threshold is. And this will depend on many factors: vocabulary, syntax, discourse organization of the text, the difficulty and the topic, and the motivation of the reader. Some theories suggest that L1 is useful only in 15 or 20% of the cases, but well, reading strategies in L2 will be useful for more than 50 or 70% of the cases. So teaching reading skills in L2 is more than necessary. The amount of exposure to text is the same or will lead to improved reading comprehension. The more we are exposed to print or extensive reading, the more we are likely to learn or to be able to learn more efficiently in L2. Then we can implement some reading time in our class, but that gives us some questions. What type of text we are going to give our children, our students? What for are we going to give them some instructions? For how much time are they going to be reading? And if we are going to allow dictionaries or not, or if we are going to help them with some words that we don't know. These are some questions that we can answer, right? That we can think about. The authors suggest the following. This is a really nice quote. It's rather long. I will be reading it for you. Students will benefit from an effective assessment component, a large number of graded readers to choose from, course credit for amount of reading accomplished, an active teacher during class time who supports students' reading, guides student selection of appropriate materials, assists students when they encounter difficulties while they read, and encourages students to read consistently. So this is there are a lot of tasks that teachers should follow in order to help students develop L2 reading strategies and proficiency. Proficient readers plan ahead. That is one of the strategies that they apply. They also they apply these strategies before, while, and after reading too. For example, before they can ask themselves some questions. Then while they read, they guess the meaning of the words. And after reading, they debate about what they have been reading, for example. There are many anyway. Proficient readers have learned reading strategies, so they must have been taught some reading strategies to learn proficiently. And this triggers a question. Would you consider yourself a proficient reader? Do you use any of the strategies of these strategies before, while, or after reading? Some of the strategies that we can apply are the following. We can predict and check predictions before reading. For example, well, what do you think this text is going to be about? Then we can write some strategies, and then we can discuss if they were true or not. We can pose questions and find answers before and after reading too. We can connect the text to the background knowledge of their students, or well, if we are readers too. That is really important because sometimes students find it difficult to read the text, not because of the difficulty of the text, but because the topic behind it is not connected to their background knowledge. They also summarize and make inferences of the text, and they also pay attention to text structure and layout. If there are some paragraphs, if there is a headline, if there are some more important words than others. And well, of course, they also guess word meaning from context. This is what we should teach our students. What the authors suggest is that it's not true that we learn these strategies per se. It's not that we are going to learn them subconsciously. We need to be taught these strategies. So we should teach our students well that these strategies can be applied when they are reading. So here are some questions for us. Which of these strategies do you use, if any? Which of these strategies do your learners use? And which of these strategies do you teach your students, or would you teach your students, right? According to the theory, the more strategies we teach them, the better, the more proficient they will become. And finally, some food for thought. Here is a very nice quote. According to the authors, strategic reading is not only a matter of knowing what strategy to use, but the reader must also know how to use it successfully. Not only this strategy that they are using, but also they need to orchestrate its use with other strategies that they are already applying.
We hope you find this presentation and this information given useful, and thanks for watching.